Good evening and welcome. Tonight, sound and multimedia artist Samson Young will discuss his ongoing project, For Whom the Bell Tolls, a journey into the sonic history of conflict, the result of a 60-day journey that spanned 5 continents. Whether from an old tower in London or the quad of a university campus in South Carolina, Young documents the sounds of these bells, as well as the cacophony of voices and street sounds that surround them in the tradition of avant-garde musicians like John Cage. In doing so, he questions for whom these bells are played, cast, and preserved. His other recent projects include using household items to recreate sounds of bombings in the Middle East, and a multimedia improvisation incorporating biosensory data from string quartet performers. Young received his training in electronic music and composition at Princeton University, both an MFA and a PhD. He has since participated in art and music festivals around the world. Young recently participated in group shows at the Center on Contemporary Art, Seattle, and the 4A Center for Contemporary Asian Art, Sydney. His work has been exhibited at international biennials in Moscow, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. Please welcome Samson Young.
Thank you for having me here. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about focusing on a recent research that I had just wrapped up, which is the For Whom the Bell Tolls project. I want to first clarify that for a lot of the work that I do, there is a research component which involved field work, and then there are sort of separate artworks that are being generated by the field work and the research. So For Whom the Bell Tolls is the title of that research, which, as explained earlier, involves sort of me going around to some 11 countries to record sounds of historically significant bells that has to do with notions of conflict in one way or another. I'm going to begin my talk by playing this sound file, which I recorded in Mandalay in Myanmar, in a temple. Just very quickly. So what you were listening to were a couple of bells of different sizes, prayer bells, in front of a temple in Mandalay, Myanmar, and it was the bells were played by kind of random visitors. Really, they were improvising with the bells, and I recorded the moments. And Mandalay was where I started with this journey, which altogether lasted approximately 60 days, but sort of split into chunks. And this image that you're looking at right now is, I guess, an image, a pretty iconic image that summarizes a lot of the sort of the stories of conflict behind many of the bells that are recorded on this journey. This is actually an image of the bell graveyard in which is basically just a shipyard near Hamburg, and it's a storage location where a lot of the bells that were adopted by Nazi Germany during the Second World War were stored, and this image, which I cannot take credit for this image. I heard about this bell graveyard from a friend, and then it sparked this whole process of research, which expanded into this journey that tried to, I guess, look at the history of conflict through sound. But before I talk about this trip and sort of what I did on this trip, where I ended up, the sound that I recorded, I think it's important to look at a few other earlier works of mine to sort of explain my approach in field work and also especially in notation. So one work that I want to start with, one early work that I want to start with is this project called the Liquid Borders Project. So this is a project that was, as it were, much closer to home. This was a project that took 2 years to complete, and it was the field work for this project was done at the Hong Kong-China border. So I'm not sure if you, if the audience might be aware of this, but Hong Kong and mainland China is still physically separated by a system of wire fences. And so the chief executive of Hong Kong in 2012 announced that the government is going to progressively open up these areas for redevelopment. And the background for this redevelopment was that sort of several kilometers south of the border fences are what is known as the frontier closed areas, and they are basically areas where they're basically no man's land, right? So for the longest time they were not inhabited except for people who are native to that area. It's very sparsely populated. And historically, those frontier closed areas, they were used as sort of catchment areas for illegal immigrants who would be coming into Hong Kong. And that was, of course, before the handover, right? The sort of historical circumstances has changed. And I don't think anybody wants to sort of trespass into Hong Kong from mainland China now. But still, these frontier closed areas remain. And so if you want to get into these areas, you actually need an official permit, a written permit by the police. And so when the government announced that they were going to open up these areas in 2012, it basically signaled that sooner or later these fences are going to be gone. And so what I did was that I systematically went to the Hong Kong-China border, and I recorded the vibration of the wire fences with contact microphones. It's actually a pretty simple gesture. I would just make one recording every 2 numbers. Like the fences are numbered, so every 2 number I'll take a short recording. And so the border is actually not very long, the Hong Kong-China border, but when you are doing a systematic recording like that, it takes a little while, let's say, to sort of walk the entire border. And it took me 2 years, and so I ended up with this archive of recording, I guess. And you can see that the contrast, right, between sort of, like this is the Hong Kong side, entirely sort of underdeveloped, very, like there are some farmers actually still on the land, But on the other side, it's very expensive condos, right? Because they are very close to the border, close to Lowu, and they are considered to be sort of prestigious properties. So I ended up with these recordings. And what I did was then I went back to the studio and I made sort of sound recordings, sound compositions out of these recordings, which I'm going to play softly in the background while I talk about sort of what I did with them. It's very softly playing in the background. So I made these sort of really abstract sound recordings, sound composition with them, which to me sound kind of like, it sound almost like the train, I don't know, like they are very abstract, right? They are mostly, a lot of them are very metallic, low rumbling sounds. So after I made these sound compositions, I made altogether 4 of them. I then sat in my studio and I retranscribed these compositions back into graphical notation. So the sound, I guess the field recording came first, and then the sound composition, and then these, you might call them scores or sort of notation, what have you, they came last. And this idea of the sort of the transcription or the notation coming last has become, I guess, very important in the work that I do. Now I do a lot of sound drawings, but it's always about the idea of a pre-existing sound, and I do a score which is a transcription of those sounds. And I guess as I did 4 sets of these graphical scores, and actually maybe I should show it on here instead because the resolution is better. And so I think I kind of got better at it. Like this was the last one that I did actually, and I did it on sort of like these engineering paper, and I was able to be more precise with like moments of like percussiveness, and I was being a little more precise with time points, I guess. But then other qualities have to be somewhat metaphorical. But this is the first project that I did, which involved sort of field work, field recording, and then translating it back into some sort of visual artifact. So this is an important piece to sort of keep in mind before I talk about the bell recording trip. Some more notation. This is actually the first one, actually, in comparison. So this is the very first one that I did before it became the scroll form and became this drum thing. It looked more like, I guess, traditional score. It was done on sort of these manuscript paper. So that was this Liquid Borders project. And so another project that I think is important to talk about before I tell you about the bells is this project, which involved sort of, again, graphical notation transcription of sound. These are actually sounds of historic firearms, explosion sounds of historic firearms. And so, for example, this is an M18 anti-personnel mine. I mean, I could try to sort of go through with you, like sort of, you know, how I imagine the sound, but I think there's the sort of imagination of the sound in the visual metaphor that I'm using. But there are also some elements that are a little more sort of, quote unquote, not scientific, but I would say methodological. For example, the pitch, right? I do try to get the pitch, and I get the pitch by feeding the explosion sound through a spectrogram and looking at the pitch material. But then for qualities like how the reverberation of the explosion developed, I have to sort of rely on colors and, again, visual metaphor. And how this started was, this whole project actually started with a book by Jonathan Goodman called Sonic Warfare, which I read and was very inspired by that book. And I started to think about sort of how sound has been historically used in situations of conflict. I mean, from the earliest days of sort of drumming, it's kind of a psychological warfare, right? You're sort of trying to scare the enemy into submission, to the most recent example of the LRAD unit, which is, I don't know if you guys know about this, but they exist. They're like these sound cannons that police forces all around the world use to sort of disperse protesters. And they are basically these, they can beam a sound directly at you as a straight beam, and at a maximum volume of 160 decibel, which basically pops your eardrum, right? But of course, when that happens, you don't see it on TV, right? When a gas bomb drops, you see it on TV, and people are like, oh, a gas bomb, But then, when these things happen, they sort of a little under the radar. But anyway, so sound is very real. It can be used as a weapon, and historically has been used as a weapon. And there's this one very specific example in history where artists working in sound and music have actually were actually involved in battle. So during the Second World War, there was an American ghost army, which was made up entirely of artists, and they had a sonic unit of musicians and sort of sound engineers, and they would record sounds of the battlefield, like infantry units and sort of like gunshots and things like that. And they would make these sound collages with these sort of recordings, and they would play them back into the battlefield to create decoy armies. So the enemy would think, Nazi Germany think that the Americans were coming from this side when they are in fact attacking from the flank, for example. And this was so effective that this information was not declassified until 1996. And I think PBS made a documentary about this only in 2012, I think, or 13, but quite recently. So I was thinking a lot about sort of what artists have done or could do in situations of conflict. And so these are basically, studies in preparation for a whole series of work in which I look at this idea of using sound as a weapon. So some other pieces that I've created in the same series include actual sound collages and composition, which I imagine could be played back into the battlefield as sort of, way to intimidate and confuse the enemy. And I also did this performance called Nocturne, which is, the performance involved me sort of using household objects to recreate sounds of explosions, especially of night bombing. So on TV, I'm watching a film of night bombing, which, if you have ever looked at and listened to sounds of night bombing on YouTube, they don't really sound like how we imagine them to be. I think our imagination of how war sound like is very much colored by Hollywood cinematic depiction of warfare. Sort of, we imagine Saving Private Ryan, but when in fact they sound almost like fireworks. There's this really seductive quality about them that is kind of messed up as well. So I listened to a lot of these sounds on YouTube, and so in the performance, I recreate these sounds with household object, basically doing live Foley to these films of night bombing. And then I broadcast them via FM radio frequency. So people experience these sounds by listening to, by using a radio. So they could listen to it in the space or they could listen to it while they are a little further away from me. And this piece called Nocturne. And so this piece is in the same series of pieces that I did together with these sound drawings of explosion sounds. And so how I got onto bells is really, it has a lot to do with these sort of explosion drawings, because I became really fascinated by these explosion sounds, not only because they were so violent or because they had these sort of cultural and political meaning about them, but also because they were very dense sounds. Like they are so dense that you can't hear everything in the moment. What I mean is that they are kind of, if you think of the visual equivalent of an explosion sound, they are kind of like the camera's flashlight. So they leave this like after image on your retina and burns this after image on your retina, but in the moment your apparatus can't get everything, so you can't help but sort of drop information. And I think of explosion sound as sort of information overload like that. But and so before we had the computer, before we could record these sounds and look at them again and again in the computer, or even looking at the spectrogram, we sort of, the moment is gone and then we drop that information, and that's kind of lost to us. But having a spectrogram in front of you and looking at sort of the detail of the sound which you miss in the moment reminds you of the fact that sort of listening in the moment is only always an aspiration, and there's all these things that you can't hear when you're looking at what you've missed. And so I became really interested in these dense moments and sort of what they, I guess, moments of hearing and possibility of hearing that they open up. So that's how I got onto bells, right? Because bells is another one of those sounds that are very condensed. They're information overload. There's really complex harmonics, which, I mean, if you're good, some people can hear sort of like in the moment, hear up to like 4 or even 5. I can hear like maybe 3 if I pretend, you know. No, I think I can hear 3 if I'm really like close to the thing and if I'm really like focused. But yeah, some people are amazing. Like I went to these like bell craftsmen, like when I was on this recording trip, and they were like, yeah, they are really good. So yeah, you can train your ear, I guess. So bell sound and explosion sound actually has a lot of things in common. I mean, first of all, historically, I mean, I'm sure many of you know this, bells and cannons are made of essentially the same material. So in times of warfare, when there's a shortage of supply of metal, the bells are always the first to go to be melted down for a weapon. And then when peace came, when there's a surplus of weapon, then weapons get melted down to create bells again. So there's this cycle. So that's the first thing. And second of all, they are both information overload in the way that I described. So I'm very interested in that. But the third thing is, and here I'm paraphrasing Alan Coben, who wrote this book on bell in 19th century European countryside. If you think about sort of before industrialization, there were really only 2 classes of objects that were capable of producing a sound that is louder than noises of natural phenomena or natural disaster, and they were cannons and bells. And so I think all of these sort of connections are very interesting. And so when I had the opportunity to propose a journey, a research trip for an award, I became interested in bells, and I decided to go record bells that has to do with conflict in different parts of the world. And they are not necessarily just conflict in terms of warfare. So there were bells that dealt with religious conflicts. There were ideological ones. There were sort of racial tension, interpersonal conflict, etc. I'm going to go through a couple of these bells that I had recorded with you and share some of the stories behind them with you. So I already told you about this, the bell graveyard in Hamburg. So what had happened was, during the Second World War, when these bells were moved from all over Germany to Hamburg to store, some well-meaning local official thought that this is ridiculous because among these bells there are some very historically significant bells, some medieval bells, some very beautiful ones. And so what they did was they weighted and classified and photographed and very carefully noted the features on each one of these bells, and there were literally thousands of them, right? And they were classified by these local officials, which had no sort of training in music or like bell classification. These are just people who thought that this is important because they're going to be melted down. This is history, right? So they went through each one of them, and they produced for each bell an index card like that. And they were classified into A, B, C, and D category bells. So if I remember correctly, the C and D category bells, which were not as valuable, they were almost melted down immediately. And many of the A and B bells actually survived the war. And so, and these index cards are now sitting in the basement of the German National Archive, German National Museum's archive in Nuremberg, and there's like a room full of them, but they are beautiful. They are sort of like, if you think about them, they are kind of like preemptive death certificate for these bells. And just the thought that somebody went through the trouble of doing each one of them, you know. And so these A and B bells actually became a huge problem for the government because they were basically warlords, right? But there was a court ruling shortly after the war, which basically dictated that the confiscation of bells from the annexed territories especially were just acts of war. And so by virtue of that ruling, these bells became German national properties. So many of them were actually never returned. And so some fragments of these bells are in the archive. Some fragments survived. And you know, many of them actually were given out randomly to churches in Germany, like to whoever cared to ask for one. It really was totally random. So it became a really big problem, and a lot of churches, especially in Poland, tried to get a hold of these bells. But unless the churches had the goodwill to finance the change of the transportation of these bells, it would be difficult for them to go back to Poland or sort of the other their places of origin. But one such bell actually changed hand in 2005, and so with the help of a Polish-speaking friend from graduate school, I tracked it down, and I went and recorded it. It was actually in this really modest church, and it's managed by this sort of one priest. He was the only person who was managing the church, and he was very kind. He let me ring the bell. It was really cool. So this is one of the bells that are recorded. There are some bells that were let's say, bells that don't ring. They were sort of silenced bells. So there's this one bell in Fez in Morocco that are recorded, and it's a silenced bell lamp. So it's actually inside a mosque right now. And it used to be a bell. It was a bell in a church, which was adopted in 1333 during the Second Islamic Inquisition of Europe from the coast of Spain. So what they did was they took the bell back, and they made a lamp out of it. So it's kind of ingenious, right? I mean, they are not only sort of like taking a really symbolic sort of religious symbol from a church, they are silencing it, they took the tongue out of the bell, so it no longer rings. And then they made a lamp out of it. They made like this decorative object out of it. It's this really violent gesture, which is sort of course, a symbol of their triumph over Christianity. So what? Because I couldn't record the bell, I can't go up and like sort of strike the bell. Would not have been a good idea. I mean, even actually kind of like carrying like recording equipment in there wasn't a good idea. So what I did was I had the local fixer sort of took in recording equipment in his backpack for me, and he actually was going in for his Friday prayer anyway. So he recorded the important midday Friday prayer underneath the bell for me. So I mean, there isn't really a bell in the recording, but the recording signified this sort of this space. It was made in this space with this, in the presence of this silent lamp bell. And there were sort of moments when moments of confusion in my research as well. For example, there was this bell that I really wanted to record. It was one of the first bell that I found out about, which I wanted to include in this trip, which was a bell in Mombasa in Kenya. And this bell used to be a slave trader warning bell. So Mombasa used to be this really hot spot of East African slave trade. And so when the slave traders would approach the harbor, local people would ring this bell to warn townsfolk that the traders are approaching, and therefore they need to go high or they need to go run. So I found out about this bell, and I really wanted to record it. And so I got in touch with the Kenya National Museum. They were like, yeah, come record it. And then this is what I found when I went there. There was no bell on the bell tower. And then they told me that, oh yeah, we replaced the bell with like a fiberglass cast because the original was stolen. But then even the fiberglass cast was not there. So there was just this bell. I was really disappointed. I was like, oh man, came all the way to Kenya, no bell, right? So there was just, and then like the museum told me, okay, look, there's this bell that's across the street that you can record, and you really should go record it. And I was like, but that's not the same bell. Why? But they were really insistent on like me going to check it out. So I did, and I went to record the bell, and somebody rang it for me. It's very nice of him. And so I was kind of curious why the museum was so why did they want me to record that bell? And then I did more like research when I was there, and I went and talked to the administrators of the church, and they told me to go talk to this clergyman, but they were also not very forthcoming with information. They're like, go talk to this guy, he would have information for you. So I went and talked to this person who is a retired clergyman, and he told me that what had happened, and I'm just going by what he told me because I cannot find any other secondary source and information to substantiate his claim. But apparently what had happened was, because the bell was so valuable, they had moved the bell from the bell tower across the street into the church. So the bell that is in the church is actually the slave trader bell. But it's really valuable. I later did find this out. It's really valuable because it's actually there's a court case on this bell right now. Some of the settlers of the area where the church is built, and where the bell tower, the slave trader bell tower was, some of those old settlers are trying to sue the church into taking possession of the bell. So this whole court case going on, which I thought was great. I did a whole interview with the retired clergyman. It was very, and I actually used it in a work of mine, which I'm gonna, if I have time, I'm going to talk about. I do a lot of interviews as well when I'm on this trip. And I found this like news clip on his at his home on the wall, which says, "Big dreams to turn Mombasa into Hong Kong and Singapore." Right? And I was like, why does anybody want to be Hong Kong, you know? Like, good luck with that, you know? we all know where Hong Kong's headed right now, you know. So, and I use that in our work as well. Because I don't have a lot of time, I feel like I should get onto like these now. So like one thing you should know when you are, like if you're ever interested in recording bell, one thing you should know is that they don't ring for you and you have to wait for it to happen, right? They ring at like 5 o'clock or like, you know, on Sunday. There was this one bell in Australia which only rings, of course, on Sunday and, you know, during the morning service at 9 a.m. So I landed in Melbourne like the previous night at 10 o'clock. And then I drove 5 hours to get to Old Darlington Point so that I could record the bell in the morning. But anyway, so I had to wait for the bell to ring. And so when I wait for the bell to ring, I had to give myself something to do, right? So while I'm on this bell recording trip, I developed this habit of doing soundscape drawings when I'm waiting for the bell to happen. And so like they're basically like, I'm basically drawing everything that I'm hearing. But so I do think of them as landscape drawings, but I'm not sort of drawing what I'm seeing, but what I'm hearing. So like to give you a sense of how to read this, I mean, I don't think it's important that you know how to read this, but for example, I'm always in the center of the picture, and then things that are happening to my left are here, things that are happening to my right are here, and then like, so for example, this is like a traffic, like the motorcycle, like going boom like that in front of me. So this is like a movement of the sound, sort of traveling across. These are like some bird sounds and some. So I do these while I'm sort of waiting for the bell to happen, and I really enjoy them actually. So now I end up doing them all the time, like wherever I go. Like when I just have time, like, you know, when I do field work or when I'm recording stuff. I sit down with my color pencil and watercolor and my stamp kit, and I sort of draw them. And I like using stamps instead of like drawing the characters, the English characters, because it actually makes me wait. Like, because when I have to pick out the characters and they would fall and somebody would kick it and I have to re-pick them up, and it sort of makes me wait. And so I spend typically like an hour to 2 hours on each of these sound drawings, and I think of them as sort of, they're kind of like long exposure photography if you think about it, because it's not like I'm flattening like 2 hours or 1 hour of time into this like moment, but I don't tell you like when I hear a certain sound. They just all of them just appear on the page like that at the same time. Depending on how good my ear is on that day, sometimes I know the pitch material as well, like for example of the bell sounds. Some other days I'm not so good with my hearing. I'm not a very good musician. So yeah, these are the sound drawings that I do. I really like doing them actually, so I keep doing them now. And so, man, I really want to talk about a couple more places, but, or maybe I'll just like brag. I will brag about this because I think it's pretty special. So I went inside of the great peacock clock in the Hermitage, and the peacock clock is this mechanical, robotic spectacle, which is General Potemkin's gift of love to Catherine the Great. And so it's actually inside this big glass container, and it makes the most ridiculous sound. Like when it's on the hour, I don't know, has anybody seen this? Like on the hour, the peacock sort of, it makes and it turns and like, really is ridiculous. So it's inside this glass case, and it happens like this whole show of like clockwork happens, I want to say like a couple of times a week only. And so when it happens, there's always a bit of a crowd surrounding it. And so I wanted to get a good, clean recording of it, right? And so I made this ridiculous request to the museum through the sponsor of the trip and who had some relationship with the museum. And I requested to go inside of the clock to record like after the closing out of the museum, which is really ridiculous. And they let me, right? And I was really happy, so I want to brag about this. But this guy was really unhappy because I was keeping him, like, because he's like the only person in the entire museum who's allowed to touch the peacock clock. But I was obviously keeping him from getting off work. But I wanna play you that sound because it's really it's a really great sound. I'm sorry that I closed it, but I can fire it up. Yeah, it's a 2-minute recording. I'll play the whole of it. Yeah, it goes on for a little longer than that. Like, it's really insane. I actually edited, like, there's some crazy bits, like crazy mechanical bits in the middle that I edited out to make it sound nicer compositionally. But, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to very quickly talk about, like, so this is like the research, right? That I went to, so there are many different places that I went to, but in the end I created, so like I said, the research is quite separate from the work that is being created. And I recently made a sound, I guess a multimedia walk or a sound walk with these bell sounds. It's kind of difficult to talk about sound walks in a talk. I mean, how to talk about a sound walk? I can't make you walk. I basically what I did was I invented this whole like fictional world with this character called Locke, who is an engineer at a secret organization called the Ministry of Gentlemanly Warfare, which is a model after an actual organization that existed during the Second World War under Churchill, which was called the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, which was under the naval force in the British Army. And so it's basically, it's a secret agent organization. So I invented this character who's an engineer for a Ministry of Gentlemanly Warfare, and his job was to install clandestine radio signals along the coast of Hong Kong and Wan Chai and Admiralty of Hong Kong, which is the northern coast of Hong Kong. As sort of, he is installing these radio signals as sort of sonic sabotage. And so I invented this whole fictional world, and I made a film, and I mixed sort of personal, like family history with into this fictional world as well. This character Locke is really into radio, and I mean he's me basically, and he's really into radio. And his mother, my mother, worked in the General Electric company in Thomson Audio in Hong Kong. A couple of decades ago, in a division that manufactured portable radio. And I found this certificate of identity that my mom has, which says "cancelled" on it, which I thought was great. Like, cause these are called CI for short, certificate of identity, and these are sort of your identity paper. If you were not born in Hong Kong, if you were an immigrant from mainland China coming to live in Hong Kong during British colonial time, this is what you would have instead of like a passport. You would have this, a certificate of identity. And I thought it's great that this says "cancelled" on it. So it became a part of the work as well. So what I did was I created this sound walk, and it's a walk that involved sort of, I mean, what you would expect, right? People walking around with headphones and iPod, but it also had street theater element, and it had live installation elements as well. And each audience is given a kit, inside of which is a whole bunch of different things, like a radio, there's a bag, there's a notebook, which is from another secret organization called the Researchers Fellowship, which is interested in the work of the ministry, and it explains the whole story, binoculars, iPod, blah, blah, blah. And so at different spots, people are triggering different sort of video, as you would expect, and they would read background information from the booklet. But at various points, they would also be asked to tune into FM radio frequency to pick up the radio signal that Locke, the character, had left behind. And so I guess my approach with the sound walk is sort of somewhere in between the sort of very hand-holding approach that Jeanette Cardiff does, where the video is like literally leading you all the way, and also the more free approach that I guess somebody like a friend of mine, Bessie Bakes, would do, where like she would let you go to these different places on your own and trigger sound files at your own leisure. So my approach is to really try to actually take people out of where they, actually not to tell people to look here or there and to focus on specific points, but to rather transport them out of where they currently physically are. Also, there are characters in the film that reappear as live performers in the street. There's an accordion player in this place called the Fenwick Pier. The Fenwick Pier is a really weird place. The Fenwick Pier is like this American outpost in Hong Kong, and there is a post office. There was a post office in the Fenwick Pier which would take mail directly to the U.S. without going through any Hong Kong authorities. And this is true. This happened like until about a decade ago. Right, and I thought, wow, like this is like a perfect place for like the CIA to plant, like, you know, agents in Hong Kong. It's the mails could just go straight to the U.S. and this is like, it's this really weird. I see if I could find a picture of it. I mean, this is like inside kind of looks like a mall, but it's a rest and recuperation point for the U.S. Navy, basically, actually, in Hong Kong. And to finish my talk, I want to play you a video from one of the destinations of this walk. Actually, before I do that, I should mention also that so at the final destination, there's these sort of street theater that happens. Sort of people come up to you and sing to you. You think they look like they are walkers, but they're actually performers, and they come to you and they sing to you. And you're also given a phone number at the end, and you call, and then it's actually me on the bridge, and I pick up and I sing to you, and that's how how the walk ends. And on the back of this card with my phone, it's kind of difficult to see, but you can kind of see there like text on the back. It actually tells the audience that there's a secret gathering of the researchers in the following night. So there's a concert that happens in the night after, and so people come back, and so this is sort of a reenactment of one of the scenes. And one of the characters reappear in the performance. So I'm going to play you this video, which you will see this character. Okay, not graceful. I'll do that again.
This is Policia Beach in Sicily. This is where the US Army made its initial landing during Operation Husky in World War II. How do ideologies caress the skin? How do philosophies caress the skin? How do conflicts caress the skin? How do reconciliations caress the skin? How do rapturous moments caress the skin? How do wars caress the skin?
Researcher File 1355-12. Set up by the U.S. Navy in the 1950s, the Fenwick Pier was built to serve as a rest and recuperation point for sailors on their way to and from the pleasures of Wan Chai's more salubrious parts. The historical presence of naval establishments in Wan Chai has brought to the district a sustaining crowd of sailors.
Go inside the building.
And at that point, the audience is instructed to go inside of the building, and they go in and listen to a radio signal. So yeah, that's all I have got for today. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
Can you show a tiny bit of the laughter when you were recreating the sounds?
Yeah, sure. The video doesn't actually do justice to the sound, I guess. But it gives you an idea. So when you're in the space with me, you hardly hear much because I'm tapping on these instruments ever so lightly. But then through the radio, it's actually really loud. So what you're hearing is not what you're hearing on the radio, but sort of what you're hearing, I guess. When you're next to me. And I look really sleepy there, because it's actually when this version was done at the Team Gallery in New York, and this was done to the way I actually intended it to be done, which is that I would do it I would do it every day. So I did this on the days that the gallery was open for 6 hours each day with a break in between, except for 1 week when I was away when I was in Miami. I couldn't be at the gallery, but otherwise I was performing at the gallery. Even when there's nobody around, I was doing this, and I imagine myself, I guess I was practicing or something. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know. I put myself through this, but it was fun. I enjoy this whole experience. Yeah, just keep this in the background. Yeah. I don't think I don't think I have thought it through that much yet. I think like the soundwalk piece is actually very recent. It was like literally, like, was it 2 weeks ago? It was like it was last week. Was it last week? 24th. It was last week. So like I don't think I have thought about it that much yet. I mean, I have done sound walks before, but they were mostly audio walks without video. But this time, because I was really stretching the limits of how far people could walk, and I was kind of afraid that people might get lost in the middle. So there was some video was naturally the thing that I went to sort of like keep people, like, at least give them hints of where to go in terms of following a path. But then it became this really good way to transport people to someplace else, I find. So I actually, what I did was, I'm not answering your question at all, but like with the soundwalk that I did, I find that my approach is kind of like making MTVs for people. Like, so there were moments when like you would be walking along a path and I'm hardly showing you anything except for what you are already seeing. But then there's this very specific soundtrack that is meant for the place. So I imagine myself sort of creating these, I guess, MTV experiences, which is very familiar to us because now that's how we travel, right? We listen to music while we are walking around. So maybe I guess what I'm trying to say is that we don't really split our senses like that. But I think we see and hear in the same person. And so I don't think of them as coming together, but I do think of how music and sound sort of colors my scene, I guess. I don't know if I'm answering your question, though. Yeah. Right, that's a really good question. It's a question that I really cannot explain. I think, and actually I talk about this quite a bit with people and with friends. I think we can all, like I can't, for example, I find that there's an internal consistency to how I choose to sound. And this actually emerges over time. It's not something that I decide before I do the sound drawing. It's not like I make a system before I do the sound drawing. But like, say, for example, bird sound always has this like yellow-orange like hue for me. And there's that consistency. And for example, are there other musicians in the audience? Like when you play a scale, like C major scale, for example, always sound like a light transparent yellow to me, and then like B flat major sound like sort of like a dirty blue to me. Like I think it's easy to sort of like sympathize with the fact that there is somebody who would have that experience, but it's almost impossible to sort of try to communicate why C major sound like a light transparent yellow to me. But I think that is very interesting, and that is actually rather insightful, the fact that we could acknowledge that there's a peculiar experience that is specific to the individual, but that communicating that experience is not very probable. But I think that's okay. I think that's kind of, and I mean, and this is not to discredit your question or anything like that, but I think about this a lot actually. I think like communication is kind of overrated. But what we need maybe is sort of an ability to imagine other consciousness, and the fact that, oh, they hear colors, and that's kind of weird, but I understand that. I think that's kind of really important. And so I think, but that's a very long way to answer your question. I think the decisions are intuitive, but there's this internal consistency that emerge over time that I have observed. But I also see that they change, like, after a while, like the beginning of the trip, the drawings that I was doing, they kind of, in terms of color and intensity, they look kind of different to the ones that I was doing at the beginning of the trip as well. So I guess it changes according to how I was feeling as well. So, yeah.